Hi, Jim Stewart again. Violent wrenching of topic away from 1877. We're suddenly vaulting our way forward to 1893 to 1898. How do we do these things? Historians can magically travel in time, and so can you, so let's get started. But before we do, let's remember that the purpose of this exercise is really to make us feel strong about where we are right now in the present. We're not fragile people. We're smart. We know what's happened. We know who to blame for it. We know how to hold it accountable. And as a consequence, we have a perspective on our current condition that allows us to see more deeply into what's wrong and see more clearly about what's the right thing to do. And for me, at least, let me continue to recommend that the first best steps you can take, that I can take, are simply to walk out the door and head the other direction. Instead of heading to the shopping center out at the Mall of America, if you talk about it right here, head to North Minneapolis or Lake Street. See what you can learn, see what you can buy, see how you can support the locals. You'll meet people that you'll be glad that you met and who will be glad that they met you. It's very different than talking about how you feel about race. Enough said. Number 13, interesting subject. White city, white nation, white empire. What is Jim talking about? Okay, we are moving to an event that is one of the most studied, epic-making events in American cultural history. Historians just go crazy digging in to the world's exposition, the Columbian Exposition of 1893 that happened in Chicago. And the impact of this exposition on cities across the country and cities around the world is simply enormous. I've given you one picture of what this thing looks like. It covers 647 acres of downtown Chicago. It's an entirely fabricated, artificial city that is done in neoclassical architecture. So you see that big Lady Liberty standing there with her back to you? She's got a big scepter up like this, and then big colonnades all down the row as far as the eye can see. And down on the end, if you can see far enough into it, is something that looks suspiciously like the US Capitol. Every nation in the world came to the United States to bring their culture with them. All over Western Europe, Africa, Central Asia. And the whole purpose of the White City was to celebrate Columbus's discovery of America. Now, here in Minnesota and any place else that you can think of, the racial vibration out of what I've just said is really, really strong and very controversial and highly racist, no matter how you think of it. We're now having a big discussion about what to do with the people who toppled the statue of Columbus here in St. Paul as a symbol of white supremacy. Here's the White City. It's white for a reason. This Columbian Exposition celebrating Columbus is also a giant statement on the part of many, many, many very, very wealthy men who want to be able to state to the world that the United States is now a world power to be reckoned with, and that the White City is a description of what can only be called a white nation. Who shows up? On one day, the biggest day of the exposition, from the standpoint of total attendance, 637,000 people in one day. It's a tourist mecca from all over the United States and many other parts of the world. The neoclassical architecture is complemented by huge exhibits that show the industrial might of this country. You can walk down and look to your right and see a huge machine bending steel. You can walk into another exhibit and listen to a giant dynamo humming as it creates nothing but energy. The industrial might of the United States, those same guys who were building the railroads before, it's that money, that power, that wealth, the right-of-ways that occupied for the railroads out in the West, the same amount of space that takes up New England. All of this is created by this period of time a web of commerce, trade, global connection, a lot of it involving cotton and sugar, that really has created for the United States this sense of an imperial mission completed. The White City, the exposition itself, is a huge expression in Chicago of a radiating dominance that goes across the continent, and then in the Spanish-American War leaps into the Caribbean, leaps across the ocean into the Pacific to the Philippines, leaps across the ocean again to the Western Pacific to give you Hawaii. And suddenly, you have a white empire governing the Little Brown Brothers. The other important part about the Chicago Exposition is the fact that it becomes the central imprint for urban planning in the United States. Major cities all across the United States will begin to develop new forms of urban organization involved with moving African Americans out of prime desired areas for creating reproductions of the white city, where you have big boulevards, big esplanades, lots of places for high-end shopping, lots of big homes that are set along parkways. It's called the City Beautiful movement, and it's designed to make urban living feel rural, classical, neat, tailored, all that, in cities that are otherwise dominated by immigrants. Not by black people yet, but by immigrants. Black people come a little bit later, and they get displaced as well. So we understand the White City to be not only a great event in American cultural history and an expression of imperial power, but we understand it as a way that a white America puts its footprint abroad on the places that it wishes to occupy, all full of little brown brothers and sisters. At the same time, there's a big role for African Americans in the exposition, not the role that they would prefer to play. You're now looking at another slide. The white city, the white nation, the white empire, and the black outcasts. This cartoon has at the front of it an African guy who could be African American, but he could be just from any place in Africa, selling watermelon. Go around and look at the vanishing point in the back of the cartoon, and it goes on to infinity. African people in every form and guise, from the United States, from West Africa, from any place you want, playing every possible stereotypical role that they can possibly play in the white city. This is the way African Americans are pictured as participating. African nations were asked to participate and bring their own exhibits. They only were allowed to show exhibits that featured backwardness, that featured inferiority, that featured various elements that had to do not with the substance of various cultures, but instead the stereotypes that white people wanted to see. Guess who boycotted the Chicago Exposition? Do you want to guess? Would you like to think it's Ida B. Wells? You're right. She, the NAACP, and old Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was born sometime in the 1840s, and by this time he's at the end of his career. There's a wonderful biography of Frederick Douglass that you have to read if you want to read about someone who's pushing back against this law of gravity all of his life. And it's a biography called Frederick Douglass, and it's written by a Yale historian by the name of David Blight. It won the Pulitzer Prize last year. Go get it, go read it. It's a wonderful antidote to the law of gravity, because underneath this stereotype picture is a tremendous amount of talking back. And if you want to find yourself in this picture, someplace talking back, you're going to have to be outside the frame, boycotting.